Hello and welcome back, and although I'm looking forward to the weekend, and I'm sure a number of you are as well, it has to be said that we're kind of ending the week on something of a bummer with the story that you may or may not be aware of right now regarding quite a significant number of layoffs happening over at Plex. Plex is something we've talked about on the channel, I would say, since the very early days, for the, persistently, I would say almost on a monthly basis, and with news that they are laying off 20% of their workforce due to challenges that the company is facing with regarding subsidizing their platform. Long term, we'll get onto that later on with certain reports that have been shared on websites like TechCrunch and the Verge. This is something we're seeing an enormous change happening in the back end of Plex, and although they have addressed it kind of tangentially with some of the platforms that I'm going to talk about today, it has to be said that I've not really found anything with regards to official statements on their own website with regards to these layoffs. 37 people, members of their team to be specific, and again, it doesn't take much searching around online, even when you're not reading some of the articles that we're going to talk about today. A very quick look at certain, the social media platforms. We know the ones. It doesn't take a great deal of searching around, and even when you're not using the links that have been supplied inside some of these news articles today, if you go to links in the description, we can look at some of the tweets on social media of people that have been laid off in this recent stem of people losing their jobs at the company. And apparently this is spread across every department. Slack messages that were intercepted by the Verge go into detail. This isn't just, say, UX design or back-end coders or trouble fixing. It does look like this is spread across every department of Plex overall. And the outpouring of the community has been pretty darn good, I would say. A particular Reddit thread, one of the initial ones, I'll link to it below, is broadly positive, I would say, and definitely the Plex, there's many things you might critique them for in terms of their business model, particularly when you compare them against slightly more freemium or completely open source platforms like Emby or Jellyfin that we'll talk about later on. Has to be said that their online support and engagement with the community on websites like Reddit has always been very, very good. But let's crack on with the story itself. Mainly that they were forced, they say, to lay off members of their staff due to challenges they are facing in terms of financing their business model. Now, they have experimented previously. You may have noticed, we talked about this quite a few years ago, back in 2019, when they were adding a kind of ad-supported free streaming services to their platform in efforts that users would engage with that and generate some ad revenue into their business, alongside obviously their subscription model, Plex Pass. But unfortunately not all users engage with it. I think it was a risky gambit to start with anyway to go down that road, because lots of people use Plex because they want to enjoy their media. Plex has always been one of the best alternatives to third-party streaming platforms, despite the growth of things like Netflix, Apple streaming services, all of them out there, Prime as well. That Plex has always given you the ability to enjoy your media your way on your devices, and I think adding those freemium streaming services there that are based on ad revenue, when there are a million squillion of those online already, was always going to be a reduced revenue stream anyway, and they were entering that field quite late, arguably in 2019. Now, circling back to what the company have stated about this, CEO Keith Valery did take to a statement online after being addressed by several of the news outlets we've talked about already, and they were talking about how they're going to be forced to restructure a lot of their potential roadmap. They're looking and hoping to be within positive cash flow within 18 months, and with that restructuring, that obviously means that certain intended plans for Plex, be it in the UI or just improvements or added on features for Plex Pass users, almost certainly going to be curtailed to a certain degree. Now, Plex has been around arguably since 2008, and their initial release really established 2009. That's a long time for that company to be around, a long time for this service to grow that enormous user base. And with that, it's spread very, very thin, so don't be surprised if you are on slightly more fringe areas of your Plex media service setup, maybe your client devices or your range of supported devices, that you are going to see quite, if not sudden change, then definitely noticeable change within those 18 months. Now, there is the question mark around, can they find finance elsewhere to maintain that business model as it stands and continue intended growth? It wouldn't be the first time that they have had outside investment. Indeed, when they were pursuing, looking into including the rental, subscription and purchasing of multimedia content from within Plex. Again, something we're seeing quite commonplace, even platforms like YouTube, where you can now buy movies from within the YouTube platform via Google. That does look like, even though that generated in excess of $50 million, this money that has been ploughed into this proposal, presumably including some of those streaming services discussed, may not have proved dividends as many of us would have liked to have seen, even with those investments. And when we go back to LinkedIn, we can see that as far back as 5 months ago, so very early 2023, there was layoffs happening even then. So the ones we're hearing about now do not sound like the only time Plex was forced to make kind of strategic cutbacks on their personnel. Ultimately, what that means is for them to receive investment from an outside party would almost certainly, based on that history there, result in their platform perhaps losing some of its uniqueness, losing some of that original charm of Plex if a third party steps in. And I'm fairly certain if they were to be approached by any of the big existing streaming platforms out there right now, again, your Disney Pluses, your Hulu, your whatever, to actually buy stakes within their platform, if they did get involved, that would only be to the detriment of the platform as a whole. So it would have to be someone outside of that arena that would have to provide funding to maintain the existing roadmap and portfolio and intended expansion of Plex down the road. Now, let's put on our worst case scenario hats. Let's think about, based on everything we've seen with the existing layoffs, the potential that we've seen that there were layoffs earlier in the year, and right now, the CEO, Keith Valerie, stepping in to effectively say that the next 18-month roadmap is suddenly going to see some rather large changes there. Let's go with you as the end user. How may this impact you? What is the worst case scenario based on all of this? Well, one of the keenest ones, the ones that people are raising online, is a change to that subscription model. Now, there are ways and means to use Plex Media Server completely for free. You can use Plex for free. You don't have to get a Plex Pass. And more newer features and services get put into the Plex Pass model. Most Plex Pass users, from what my understanding is, utilize it for things like hardware transcoding. And although there are extra features there that are built into some of the GUI features and some of the add-ons for the metadata scraping and some of the newer featured services, I would say that Plex Pass, normally it's the support of hardware transcoding in the expansive user base that comes along with that is one of the main reasons people go for it. And arguably, a business decision that Plex made quite a while ago that a lot of users have really been enjoying, but in terms of long-term business and support models isn't great, is of course that lifetime membership there. They have been running a lifetime membership. I tried to look into this online when they started it, and they rolled out Plex Pass in around about 2013-14. And I'm fairly certain the lifetime pass was roughly about that time. So people have been looking at approximately a decade if they were early adopters of Plex Pass support. Again, we're looking at 94 quid there, but of course the price has gone up over time. But even then, you divide that figure by 10 years, that has been an insane value there. However, it looks like if you were to try to, bring new funding into the Plex model, there is the potential, keyword potential, for them suspending lifetime memberships. Now, maybe it will be that they will stop providing lifetime memberships from a given point, or they will give existing lifetime membership users a kind of, you've got 12 months, because I'm sure there's something in that T&C that would have been rolled in to allow them to do that, particularly if they change the available range of tiers. So they might change the tier system entirely, which could potentially close out the lifetime membership if they were to go down that way to kind of produce a better revenue stream or a more cultivated revenue stream there, because that leads us on to when people want to utilize Plex on certain devices, when there are some Plex apps out there for certain devices such as iOS and Android where you need to pay for the application. Now, if you have a Plex Pass, you can have access to those. But if they changed the subscription model, you may not have access to those. Or they will roll out these in-app purchases for the apps on certain devices moving forward. Now, again, they go into quite a lot of detail about whether you have a Plex Pass and how you can get around those. But if you are running a Plex Media server for your kids, your grandkids, your extended family, you've got loads and loads of family members running Plex, this might impact you, because all of a sudden, all of them overnight will suddenly say, I can't get access. But again, this is worst case scenario stuff and is not fairly representative of what might actually happen. Next up, something that might well happen, because we're seeing a real trend to this on streaming platforms, is integration of ads into their platform. Now, it might be, you might be thinking, oh, cool, well, if it's free and it's got ads, they can get some revenue. And that would be great. But there is, of course, given the changing times, a potential that much like Prime, Netflix, Disney, Paramount, HBO Plus, you can see here on screen, all of these right now have a with and without ads tier. And these are enormous platforms, and it is a clear, proven, revenue stream that these companies are pursuing. So there's every possibility that Plex might go down that road and start rolling out a new change up of their tiering system to integrate an ad-based version to create something between full Plex Pass, no Plex no Plex Pass at all, and in the middle something of a little bit of one and a little bit of the other to get the Plex Pass experience at a subsidized rate. And that might be one of the methods they may go down, which again, that's going to be completely choice based. So if you're prepared to go Plex Pass or not pay at all, this may not impact you, but still nonetheless, this may be something that Plex may wish to pursue later down the line to have that change around into positive cash flow in 18 months. Then you've got to measure up the impact of what changing an 18-month roadmap can have on existing plans for Plex and its support, on as many platforms as possible. We already sort of referred to it earlier on that right now it is a fantastic platform that supports a lot of things, and they are innovating within that. There are lots of back-end changes that you very rarely see and bug fixes, but there's also support of new and more efficient compression, codecs and file formats as 4K and 8K start to turn around, and therefore better compression techniques need to be adapted and created to better harness these enormous visual featured productions for them to be compressed into something to watch on your mobile phone. And if there isn't sufficient revenue for research and development, there is every possibility that it may want to maintain the platform as it stands and then not support those. So innovations that we have talked about recently to do with, say, skipping ads automatically and indeed skipping intros automatically, they are great things, and people, bravo to them for that. And it may be a case that Plex as a platform will have to reprioritize where a lot of this resource and funding goes towards, which invariably means that you may have a lovely stable service here, but you're missing out on newer innovations and improvements on client hardware and client software moving down the line. One of the best examples that we talked about that was kind of a death nail for another company that we talked about was Drobo. Now, Drobo is a brand that we talked about in the channel several times. We did a history video recently, and one of the biggest red warnings that came from them was when they weren't supporting Mac OS Catalina when everyone was upgrading their Mac systems towards it. And the result was that people were like, do not upgrade if you want to continue using your Drobo. The reason being that it kind of led to elements of instability and complete inaccess for a lot of users. Now, again, that was Drobo, and that was one of the loudest, clearest signs that their company just did not have the internal revenue to continue with the R&D on these newer and evolving platforms, both be they hardware or software based. Now, Plex right now doesn't seem to be showing off those indications because it's very early days and everything we've heard here, but there's still no denying that as client hardware and compression techniques and file formats and multimedia as a whole improves, they need to stay on the cutting edge of that, and when they don't, it's going to get louder and louder and louder, so it's something we've really got to keep an eye on. And the last thing that may happen if the company decides to sort of roll back a lot of the development money that's coming into their business may be that as new client hardware arrives, both as Plex Media Server and in client device form, they may start rolling back the individual support of those client devices, or look at the sheer number of client hardware and software OSs they're currently supporting and realize they've got to, decrease those number of devices so they can be more efficient with the time and energy and workflow and, of course, the resource. Now, case in point, something we talked about in the channel a while ago is when you want to put Plex Media Server on a NAS. And recently we have seen a lot more NAS devices start to roll out with newer, more efficient Realtek ARM processors. And as Intel themselves start basically renaming and rebadging and effectively giving the boot to the seller on a Pentium in a number of ways to a new convention, that means that a new generation of Plex may need to be slightly retooled to these newer platforms. The result is that every time a new hardware platform arrives, not just an OS, the Plex Media Server application needs to be adapted, and that takes time, which takes money. Now, Synology recently rolled out several of the new ARM-based NAS systems, the DS223, the DS423, and now the DS223J, all rolling out on an RTD 1619B processor. And right now, there ain't an app for Plex Media Server on those. There hasn't been an app for like 3-4 months since those systems first rolled out, because it's not down to Synology to make that. It is down to Plex to make that. Now, again, that is a very small example, but if Plex is looking at having this much money, but it has to support this many new and even to some degree legacy level OS and devices, they're going to have to streamline that, which means that maybe your relatives, maybe your friends and family that are using devices that are using the Plex client application, their app may no longer get those security updates, may not get those feature updates, or later down the line as they update their devices, they may not have access to your Plex Media Server at all. But crucially, all of those things are hypothetical, and as I said, they are worst case scenario things. They do not represent the way Plex may go in the next 1 to 2 to 3 to 10 years. I do think we are going to see the end of the lifetime pass. I think either they are going to have to change their entire portfolio towards how they structure the pricing model and the tier options there, but I think the lifetime model is almost certainly going to come to an end, and if it does, we shouldn't really complain about that, unless, of course, you've purchased it in the last year or two. But for everyone else, we've had a sweet ride with that, and all the features, the services, the updates, the security fixes, and for the sake of, what, $100 or whatever it was a decade ago, that's pretty darn good value. So I personally am okay with it, but that's based on my own experience and not yours. I will say that for those of you that are looking beyond Plex, I'm not saying it's time to jump ship. I'm definitely not saying that, because Plex is a very unique beast. But there's no denying there are other options out there. So, for example, the two names that will keep coming to the forefront are going to be Emby and Jellyfin. The reason being, Emby is that kind of slightly freemium platform, and they've very much gone down that whole app you've got to pay for purchase model for certain OSs, but Emby has a degree of customization that Plex doesn't have, and the ability to add features and services. But way beyond that is Jellyfin, the truly open source free app service there, and again, hugely customizable. And I would argue, if you're prepared to spend a little bit more time setting up your multimedia server, and you don't mind configuring your friends and family devices a little bit more work, because it lacks a lot of the user-friendly, chewable nature of Plex, it's not that much higher, and you will see the benefits there. Now, and get ready for the self-plugging. We've done a full comparison guide here, breaking down all of these platforms, pricing, services, what's included, what isn't, what's included with the paid version, and what isn't. It's all rolled in there. Alongside that, we've also done video comparisons of Emby versus Jellyfin. We've done a comparison of Plex versus Jellyfin, and of course, we've done one of Plex versus Emby. We have covered the lot there, and I recommend you check those out. But well, I hope you guys have a nice weekend. I know it's a rubbish way to end the week, and I'm really sorry to tell you that. For now, nothing seems to be changing, but just keep an eye on these, and definitely we will keep an eye open if and when Plex makes a few more louder public statements, which cannot be much longer from now. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next time.